June the 6th, 2026. Guys, welcome to another episode. What we're dealing with tonight on this one is we understand that the reservoirs are dropping, that the Colorado River Basin is in trouble. All of that area, nearly 50 million people, will be affected very soon, possibly within less than 60 days, on some very major problems with both Lake Mead and Lake Powell. By the way, Lake Mead now is down into the 148 section. It went from 150s to 149, now to 148. But what we're going to look at tonight is putting all of the data that we've looked at in the last few videos into one format, and then looking at the possible outcomes of how it will affect the desert Southwest. Now, this will be a model for the entire country and possibly for the entire planet for the people that have not already experienced it. But it's called, this is what we got back, called Day One, the silence and the rule of threes. The moment the grid goes down across the Southwest, the clock starts ticking on human biology. Pumps stop instantly. Modern water systems rely on electric booster pumps to maintain pressure and to move water across vast desert distances. Within hours, water pressure drops to zero, taps sputter, and go completely dry. Now, this data included the fact that when we drop to 1035 within possibly less than 60 days, then this type situation starts happening, okay? The heat trap. At that point, without air conditioning in a region where summer temperatures routinely exceed 115, and homes and high-rise buildings rapidly turn into ovens. Real estate ceases to be a shelter. It becomes a thermal trap. Listen to this. It's important to factor into your plans. And again, we're looking at a section of the nation, but this water problem is everywhere, all around the planet. And then what comes, because not only are you getting less water downstream, you're getting less hydropower, which is cheap. And they're going to be increasing the data center 24/7 load on the older grids. All of this is factored in. But when we get to that point, we're overloading the grid. You're going to start to see things like cell towers rely on battery backups that drain within 4 to 8 hours. By the end of the first night, millions of people are plunged into total information darkness, unable to know if the outage is local, regional, or permanent. And so, again, civilization, that as we know it, relies on electricity. The moment that stops, civilization begins to go downhill to a Mad Max situation very quickly. A lot of lives will be lost. Now, on day two, it's titled The Depletion of Retail Supplies. As the realization sets in that power is not coming back, human behavior shifts from confusion to panic. Groceries are spoiled and stripped. Refrigeration fails across all commercial centers. Perishable foods spoil within 24 hours. Shelves are stripped of bottled water, canned goods, and batteries within hours by those who reacted first. Guys, don't be that group. You prepare now. No fuel access. Gas station pumps require electricity to extract fuel from underground tanks. Vehicles attempting to flee the region run out of gas on major arteries like Interstate 15, creating massive immovable gridlocks that trap people in the desert heat. You don't want to be a part of this. Again, this is information and data fed into AI. That's what we're looking at. And what are the real-time reactions using only the data input. And the data input was exactly what you've seen. The drop of the water, the heat increasing, the El Nino, the evaporation rates. Trying to keep this as accurate as possible, but at the same time, this video is about keeping it real so you understand. And why did they call it the rule of threes, guys? Because the dehydration threshold. By the 48-hour mark, individuals without personal water surplus begin experiencing the early stages of severe hydration, lethargy, confusion, and reduced heat tolerance. 72 hours, guys, it starts to get bad. And again, so even if you can't store a lot of water, if you can store enough to where you can get your senses about you, make a plan when you wake up to this reality, at least do that. You know, have a few 100 gallons or whatever. Say, man, this thing's about to get shut off. Do I have enough at least to drink to keep me alive for a week or so to figure out an alternative plan? Or are you just going to be caught naked? Now, this is day 3. Again, using data, but this would make a hell of a book or a movie or a series, except that it's real. And we kind of been mentally prepared from it, actually from Hollywood. Anyway, day 3, the 72-hour survival flashpoint. On the 3rd day without water, human physiology reaches its absolute limit and civil order breaks down completely. It's called biological desperation, guys. At 72 hours, a human body begins to experience organ failure from dehydration. The physiological drive to find water, or the psychological drive to find water, overrides all social conditioning, laws, and moral boundaries. We've talked about this. You'll lose your best friends when their kids are hungry. Desperate residents begin targeting any potential source of moisture, draining residential water heaters, siphoning swimming pools, and breaking into commercial properties. The conflict zones, flashpoints, erupt around the few remaining functional resource points. And by then, guys, the military will more than likely have stepped in to control those resource points. Private, secure properties owned by the wealthy, equipped with independent solar grids, and deep private wells become prime targets for desperate populations, turning the crisis into a direct struggle for immediate survival. Guys, you cannot name it or title it any different than that, a struggle for immediate survival. That's why backup supplies of water are so critical. At least it gives you a little bit of time. Now, the reality of the whole thing is that when electricity, which is the invisible infrastructure that keeps a desert habitable, when that power is removed, the environment instantly reverts into its natural, hostile state, proving that modern civilization is entirely dependent on a continuous flow of current, both in water and in power. And again, when you talk about keeps the desert habitable and that's removed, you're definitely into a Mad Max situation in the sense that there should more than likely be some parts of the Colorado River that remain intact after the damage from the dams and all of that is overcome. So there will be regional people that can survive from that. Not only that, it was made for desert wildlife. People had adapted to it, just like our Native American brothers and sisters, but not for millions of people building homes. And it will return to that. And in this section, guys, it talks about the survival timeline and that it's weeks, not years, once we get to this point. It says it's a 7 to 10 day biological wall. Without a functioning water grid or incoming emergency aid, the vast majority of the population trapped in the urban desert, they cannot survive past the first week. Are you listening? By day 10, the sheer lack of hydration leads to mass mortality, effectively ending the chaotic, high-intensity conflict phase in the cities. That's a pretty rough way to end it, isn't it? 30-day resource depletion. Within a month, easily accessible surface water sources like swimming pools, decorative lakes, and water heaters, listen to that, will be completely drained or evaporated by the extreme desert heat. Once these finite, unpurified reserves are gone, the geographic area becomes physically uninhabitable for anyone without industrial drilling equipment. Who has that? It's the big four data centers that have bought the farmland and the huge drilling rigs to go into the next layer of water. They still need power for that. There's a race, but our Father is going to win this race. It goes on to say the long-term survivors who last. Any survival beyond the first month is restricted to two specific groups: the ultra-wealthy / secured enclaves. Elite compounds equipped with independent solar microgrids, deep rock aquifers, and military-grade security can technically last for years. However, they face a ticking clock on mechanical replacement parts, fuel filters, and the long-term psychological strain of operating under siege. Again, Hollywood. The mobile nomads, small, highly mobile groups who migrate out of the deep desert towards permanent natural water sources like the Colorado River Channel or the mountain ranges to the north, can survive indefinitely. They adapt to a low-energy scavenger lifestyle, but their numbers will be a tiny fraction of the original population, the way it was meant to be. That's the only way the desert, its wildlife, the fish in the rivers can make it. Mother Nature, because it's a creation of our Father, is rebalancing itself, and we're going to see it. Guys, and I see at the end of these videos a couple of different comments that keep popping up from different people, and they're very legitimate questions. One is talking about desalination, and I explained that there's no way humanly possible to desalinate or to afford the cost of the desalination creation of the plants, much less the upkeep for this many people. And the other question is, well, BP, we've seen it, and they're right. We've reported on cloud seeding for rain. But guys, that only happens if you have some moisture in the air close by, and you're not creating rain. Never has man ever created H2O. They simply move it from one source to the other. In other words, when they cloud seed an area, like when they flooded Texas a few years back, they had moisture there, but they seeded it. But what happened, it created drought in other areas. So that's not really that's not really a correct way to handle a situation. Because right now we're looking at a high pressure dome via the satellites that I keep showing you. There is no precipitable water to make cloud seeding from. But again, very legitimate questions. Why not? Same reason they can't pump water from the Mississippi River over the mountains. It would take too much in cost, energy, time, materials, and then you would drain the river that's already being drained. Remember, guys, it's not just surface water. Under the Colorado River, there are declining aquifers. Under the Mississippi River, too. Now, what does that mean? And what have we seen when these aquifers decline? We see giant sinkholes either collapse a lake or start pulling houses in, or big holes out into the middle of a field or whatever. Now imagine that happens up under a dam or up under a rock riverbed. And again, I asked a question the other day, and to get all the data on what is under the Colorado riverbed, and it is a series of aquifers. And so Mother Nature has ways. Our Father has plans, and he will not let his planet be destroyed. It is his perfect creation, and the greed of mankind has tried to destroy it. Earth age after earth age, after flood, and now by fire. Now, this is important too. Again, these are replies. This is putting all the data into a system that already has access to everything from the Bureau of Reclamations, to everything the federal government is doing, everything the power companies, the water people, everything that's going on, and puts it into this, along with the data we give it from the lakes of Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and the other systems. It says the timeline between the calculated 57-day infrastructure drop at Lake Mead and the corresponding failure at Lake Powell moves from a localized engineering crisis to a federal militarized response in exactly 90 days. What is that saying? If we're looking at a 57 or 55 to 60 day timeline on the 1035 level, and Lake Powell and Lake Mead are mirroring that drop, almost parallel. But anyway, that means 30 days after that, in 90 days, the situation has become so bad, so quickly. Again, federal military response occurs. The federal government is not blind to this. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamations and the Department of Defense have spent years drafting operational alternatives and containment protocols. You understand what we're talking about now? You understand, just like when Walmart started building the supercenters, they had very little windows in them. Remember what I was talking about? Big gates around the back. You could easily shut down all access. Same thing in some of these bigger data centers that may or may not be completed by that time, but they're very isolated, very protected, have their own water resources. Think about what I'm telling you. It says, again, the federal government is not blind to this. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Defense have spent years drafting operational alternatives and containment protocols precisely because the 7 basin states have continuously deadlocked. Guys, look at the news today from Colorado. They still cannot agree on anything. None of the 7 districts. They're going to force a federal takeover. Maybe that's part of the plan. We don't know, but I guarantee you one thing. I don't care what government you run or are part of, you can't make the aquifers come back. You can't make that river rise. That damage is done. It is not a drought. It's a ridification. It will not come back in our lifetime. So as the feds move in from telling one state to do, let this much out or whatever, the 7 different areas to try to balance it out, they're not going to have very much in their hands to even balance for very long. And their power will fall back into the places that, what they're talking about, these operational alternatives and containment protocols. What does that mean? Think of containment protocols. It has different meanings, but you understand exactly what I'm saying. They're going to be, again, the military is aware of this, the federal government is, and they have already set up pre-staged sections for this conflict to happen, because they're not telling us, mainstream media is not telling us, but that does not mean that they're blind to it, right? They just don't want to create panic, and in the chicken crap way, they don't want to let anybody know while they're covering their butts. Anyway, the sequential breakdown of the infrastructure failure, the public eruption, and the state responses progress through a highly organized timeline. And also getting this data back, guys, weeks 1 through 4. Again, a perfect series. The corporate pivot and the whispered directives. What does that mean? The initial failure triggers an immediate divergence between public messaging and the elite actions. In other words, MSM is going to cover it up. Got it? The federal standstill. Publicly, officials will call the initial drops between the 1035-foot turbine at Hoover Dam a temporary maintenance fluctuation to prevent immediate stock market and real estate panic. Guys, any real estate agent right now that has one brain cell left, which are probably very few because they're crooked as hell, but would understand what's coming and know that the real estate panic and failure is coming to both them and the stock market. So how are they pre-preparing? Anyway, the institutional capital flight. Behind closed doors, investment firms and corporate entities holding agricultural land will immediately execute automated water asset sales. Water asset sales, guys. Reallocating capital out of Southwest portfolios. The grid rerouting, the Western Area Power Administration will quietly activate emergency grid sharing protocols. grid sharing protocols, buying high-priced fossil fuel and nuclear power from the Pacific Northwest and Texas to artificially patch the massive hydropower deficit left by the dying dams. Guys, it's nationwide, it's worldwide. They can reach over and grab something from another area very temporarily because those areas are suffering also. Now, I know I'm emphasizing this, but I want to, because when I put the data in to get this response, I emphasize being correct, no wondering, try not to have any hypothesis other than what's normal, but using the data to see what happens, guys. And it wasn't easy to put it all together, and so that's why I want to share it with you, and I hope you share the video and save it, because it is kind of like a guidebook to something that we've never really experienced before. Weeks 4 through 6, the taps sputter and the first protest. Civil unrest does not start as a political movement. It begins as a frantic response to dry plumbing in low-income, marginalized desert communities. Exactly where it's going to start from. The flashpoint is the first major protest to occur between days 30 and 45. They break out in the outlying desert suburbs of Phoenix, rural towns in Mojave County, and the unincorporated desert community south of Vegas. The trigger is as municipal water pressures drop due to localized grid brownouts. Water utilities implement severe, unannounced rolling water shutdowns. The eruption outraged residents experiencing 150-degree Fahrenheit heat. Guys, by the way, it's been well over 100 the last 3 days in Mead, at Lake Mead in Vegas. And I told you that. I said after the first day, the heat starts to set in. The second day, the evaporation starts. Third day, it just continues. Tomorrow will be day 4 in triple digits. Again, outraged residents experiencing 115-degree Fahrenheit plus heat waves without air conditioning or running water. They surround municipal water distribution centers and county administrative offices. The initial protests are decentralized and chaotic, consisting of thousands of people demanding basic utility restoration and a halt to corporate agricultural pumping. Guys, you know how well that works. Now let's go 6 to 8 weeks, and they're talking about it spreading from localized protests to regional escalation. The protests rapidly transition from localized urban unrest into systemic, angry blockades targeting supply infrastructure. The supply chain sieges. By week 7, activist groups and desperate citizens block the major transportation arteries. Guys, we've seen this from Los Angeles to Gaza, specifically Interstate 15 and Interstate 10 coming back to the U.S. They seize or halt commercial freight trucks carrying bottled water and emergency supplies to prevent them from leaving local jurisdictions. What happens then? Martial law. Anyway, targeting the elite enclaves in this week 6 to 8. Protesters pivot toward the visible symbols of resource insulation. Now, we're following the mentality of how this progresses, so remember that. Protesters pivot towards the visible symbols of resource insulation. Data centers sucking up millions of gallons of cooling water. Private golf courses still utilizing recycled groundwater, and the walled solar power estates of the ultra wealthy. Now, weeks 8 to 12, guys, so we're out to 2 months. And it's called the Federal Reaction and Martial Law. The federal government's pre-planned contingency operations are fully implemented by the 90-day mark. Again, that 90 days, guys, 60 days, and then that last 30, prioritizing the preservation of federal infrastructure and national defense over local municipal comfort. In other words, shutting everybody down except for themselves. Now, how will that start? We don't know. It could be the Insurrection Act when they start attacking the elite enclaves and the water centers and things like that. That's what it says here, the Insurrection Act activation. The President invokes the Insurrection Act deploying the National Guard and active duty military units to establish the Southwest Resource Command, SWR. Militarized distribution checkpoints. Guys, how many times in the last 20 or 30 years have people talked about FEMA camps and lines? Militarized distribution checkpoints. Major desert cities are placed under strict military curfews. Armed checkpoints are erected around all critical water infrastructure points. Guys, they will be deemed critical infrastructure points, like he said, and that means that you can be shot on sight, and you will be if you try to rush one of these places. Best thing you do is find you a back creek or somewhere down on that Colorado River where nobody's at. Anyway, major desert cities are placed under strict military curfews. Armed checkpoints are erected around all critical infrastructure points, including Las Vegas, third straw. That one that we show in the models of Lake Mead, to where after 1035 they will rely on that third straw more and more. But it won't be up to Vegas now. Now, Vegas has a lot of money, so we'll see, but it will be up to the federal government. Again, they will be erected around all critical infrastructure points, including the third straw intake facility, the Central Arizona Project Canal, called CAP, guys, and regional groundwater pumping stations. Water is legally nationalized and distributed under a strict per-person daily ration card system. I guess you'll have credits. The forced evacuation orders coming, this is 8 to 12 weeks again. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, called FEMA, the ones that skipped all the conservative houses after the hurricanes, designates specific zones such as the Deep Mojave Corridor as uninhabitable resource extraction zones. They're going to try to stop the nomads, the people, the survivors. Guys, what did I tell you? They want us all dead so that the elite can rule the very top. They don't need us. They think the AI and the robots will do all the work for them. Now, they say what they want is utopia via that all human needs are met and that all work is done by robots. They do not want the humans here. Neither did Enlil. Same group, more than likely, is still in control. Same essence. Again, they will designate specific zones. The federal government ceases all efforts to rebuild or power civilian infrastructure in these zones. Guys, you can't rebuild if you don't have water. They're not like just saying we're going to stop. They don't have a choice. Again, they will cease to rebuild or power civilian infrastructure in these zones, initiating forced, organized evacuations of rural populations towards state-managed refugee processing centers further north. It says the speed of the rollout demonstrates why the elite have been actively preparing. They understand that when the primary river system crashes, which they have the same numbers you and I do, guys, probably better, probably more updated, more sophisticated. Anyway, the state's role instantly shifts from managing a democracy to managing a raw, militarized survival operation. We call it Mad Max. Guys, and let's take a look at the current information. Going back to the last 14 days, I'm going to show you the very current hourly measurement in just a moment. But this is important. Over the last 14 measurements, let me show you that right there, Lake Mead is down 2.92 feet in 2 weeks. See that? Now what we're seeing right here is starting on May the 23rd up until yesterday, on Friday, June the 5th. We were then, now we're a little lower than that, pretty low as a matter of fact, at 1048.83. But what is the change? They're showing 27. What is the average over these 14 days? 21. What number was I using in the formula I was giving you guys the other day showing the downfall points? It was 0.20444. Remember that? So the average over this is higher at 0.21 than what I was giving you. We've also seen other days, you know, like 0.32 higher, 0.27 yesterday, but the average, guys, is higher than the number I gave you, and I told you to expect that because, again, 3 days of very high heat. So let's take a look at our today's hourly average. Again, Lake Mead, Mountain Standard Time, this would be from midnight to 1 last night, early in the morning. And as we scroll this down, we are now at 13 to 1400 hours, guys, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And our level is 1048.76. See that? We were watching the fall between 1051 and 1050 a week ago. And now 1040.78. Again, we're averaging 0.21 now on our depletion rate per day. Again, and going back to just yesterday afternoon, guys, inflow is not quite half of the outflow, but very close to it, 1739 compared to 950. But right here, we saw a 0.27 foot drop just yesterday. Now, again, my averages were 0.20. This is almost another digit added in here to make this 2 or 3. If that continues, again, we're looking closer to the 50-day timeline of the 1035 level of a lot of shutdowns and the beginning of the end for the Colorado River, both hydroelectric and water systems. Mass migration, that's what this video is about. Guys, I don't want to drain it out any longer, but I thought, again, this data's been up. I've had it for 2 days. Yesterday was just a long day. But I did want to have time to wrap it into something concrete. Again, just showing the information input and what's coming back out, looking at that data, just to make you watch and to prepare. Our Father loves you. I love you guys. This is a major heads up. You be safe.